Hello, you can call me B27. Don't ask why. When I was younger, probably less than 7 years old, around 5 or so, I recalled something strange. It frightened me so much that I almost started to cry, but I couldn't. There were no tears, just a small, sharp gasp. I was playing in the shallow parts of the water, not because I couldn't swim, but because I was rolling around and playing. My memory is fragmented for various reasons, so I apologize if I don't provide too many details. As I played, I began to feel sad and uneasy, no matter where I sat or stood. After a few minutes of tearing up, I started laughing and playing again. I'm not sure if what I encountered that day had anything to do with my emotions, but considering they started acting up before the issue began, it's very possible. I say I'm not sure because I was born with a few mental health problems, but anyway, back to the story. As I played, I rolled around in the same spot twice, but the second time around was, well, as I mentioned, if I could have cried at that moment, I would have. I remember wanting to scream, but nothing came out. What I grabbed that day would haunt me for the rest of my life. Initially, I thought it was a mask, but there was grass and skin and it felt like hard bone. My fingers had landed in the eye holes. It was gross. When I moved my arm up, it came with it. Reflecting on it now, it looked like someone had carved the front of a human skull off and then flattened it into a sick mask. I felt scared, confused, and sick all at once. I've had some weird things happen in my life. This happened about 15 years ago during the school holidays. My friend, let's call her Sarah, and I were extremely bored and just wanted to chill. It was summertime, and we lived in a small town called New Braunfels in Texas, where everything was spread out. We didn't know where to go around midnight, so we decided to go to the park. It's a bit large. We were there for an hour or so, and nothing unusual happened until we both saw someone or something crouched on a table. Firstly, it was weird that someone else was in the same park at this time. What was creepy, though, was that this person was crouching on a table instead of sitting on the bench. What disturbed me was that, as I kept looking closer, I noticed that there were wings. The body was completely human, but had wings, the part that I'll never forget. All of a sudden, the most blood-curdling scream, like a woman being stabbed to death, sounded. It was like a woman's scream, but inhuman at the same time, something a normal person doesn't do, but a scream animals can't even make. It was almost like those screams in a movie that a demon or something makes. Then it stood up, and this figure had to be at least 8 feet tall. We both ran as fast as we could. Have you ever run to your lungs' maximum capacity? I ran until I had no air left in my lungs, and then kept running until I had to slow down because I was coughing too much. We knocked on people's doors and kept getting threatened that they had guns and would shoot if we didn't leave. We were locked outside with this thing. I kept looking into the sky because this reminded me of Jeepers Creepers in the movie. After maybe 20 minutes, the police showed up and, of course, thought we were on drugs. They wanted to let us go. I walked the rest because I lived a few blocks away, and the police drove my friend home. There was a white cop and a Mexican cop. When the Mexican cop heard the story, he pretended like it was just made up, but the look on his face said he knew something about this thing that nobody knew. I have PTSD now, and hate going outside alone at night, especially near parks or the woods. Weird people don't scare cops, and animals don't scare cops. You know it was something much worse if a cop lies and can't keep a straight face because of fear. Like I said, it's a story that happened, and I remember it clearly as day. But it's a story that nobody believes. I tried to make it as short as possible. Hi. Can you please tell me if you can explain what I'm about to share with you? A few months ago, my good girlfriend, let's call her Lisa, and I went to the forest to smoke. The forest is about 1 kilometer behind the village where I live. Just for the record, we were going there every weekend. So it was just a normal Saturday, and the forest was beautiful. Everything was normal until we found a random path that Lisa discovered, about 10 meters behind the bench we were sitting on. We walked on that path, and at the end there was a perfect circle made of trees, normal trees, just like any others in the forest. We entered the circle, with me in the middle and Lisa standing next to me. Right when we entered, birds stopped tweeting, and it started to get cloudy, even though the entire day had been sunny and warm. Also, it was freezing. I looked up at the sky, and then I felt different. I don't know how to explain that feeling, like I had just teleported somewhere I'd never been. I looked at Lisa, and she looked confused too. It was kind of creepy, so we decided to go back. We started packing our things because it felt like someone was watching us. We took our bikes and slowly left the forest. At the exit, I felt like something touched my back. I screamed and started riding my bike as fast as I could. I stopped in the middle of the road to wait for Lisa, who was behind me. When she caught up, it was even colder. My hands were freezing. I couldn't feel them and couldn't move them. We decided to go slow again because we were far from the forest. After some time, I realized that no matter how far we were, when we looked back at the forest, it looked like it was about 10 meters away. When we finally came back to the village, everything was warmer. We went to my house and called our very good friend. Let's call him Phil. He came, and we told him what happened, and he was shocked. Lisa also told me that when I felt like someone touched me, she saw something behind me. For the rest of the day, the three of us watched a movie to relax. Lisa had to go, so Phil and I walked her home. After that, I went home, and Phil went to a party. The next day, Phil told Lisa and me that when he was walking home, he passed by the road that led to the forest when he heard something. I don't remember what that thing was saying, but it was something like keys. Phil is not schizophrenic, and nothing like that had ever happened to him. Also, all the way home, he was sweating and felt like something was watching him. The next week, Lisa and I wanted to show Phil a circle made of trees, but when we got to the end of the same path, there was no circle. A month after the incident, all three of us had nightmares every night. Recently, Lisa and I have been talking to people who are no longer with us in our dreams. Lisa was talking to her dead cousin. About a week ago, I had a dream, and in the dream, there was a man who had done something bad to me and Lisa, and he was dead, and his wife was standing next to him. He was apologizing for what he did, and his wife was crying. At that moment, I knew that he wasn't with us anymore, and I was confused. I don't know if these dreams have anything to do with the incident. Please, if you know what this situation is, tell me. I would be very grateful.
My friend and I were at our local Incredible Pizza. We were gaming, playing the ticket claw machines when my friend said, "Let's go to the fast go-karts." I, being the average hyperactive friend everyone has, of course, agreed that we should go. When we got in line, we lied about our age to get in the fast race. We were 12 at the time, and you needed to be 14 and 4 inches to get on. We got into line, and after about 15 minutes, a tall, smelling white guy with bleached, braided hair, brown roots, and yellow crooked teeth got behind us and started making small talk. He was wearing a weird black hoodie. He was talking like he was drunk, and he had to lean on the rails to stay balanced. We were talking with him, and then he told us to tell him our age. We said we were 12. The guy then decided that, since he's older, he gets to get in front of us. This let me know right away that he was on something. He pulled out a crushed piece of paper and started giggling. He started telling us to sniff it. My friend said, "No thanks. Please get it out of my face." The guy then started asking me without talking what my friend's problem was. When he told me to sniff it, I didn't argue. When I sniffed it, it smelled like a cigarette. But not your average cigarette. It burned your nostrils really bad. My friend then told me he wanted to go to laser tag and that this line wasn't worth it. I knew that meant he was uncomfortable and wanted to go, so we left and ran out of the place. We met my aunt who had taken us to Incredible Pizza. We told her what happened and she then took us to security. Soon after we went to security, I told them his description. He told me to go with him to identify the guy. We found the weird guy in a go-kart ready to ride when the officer put him in cuffs. We went back to playing, but my friend and I were still traumatized. Security soon came back over and said the guy had pot and was high on it. He told us the guy couldn't be arrested unless the manager wanted him to get arrested. We left soon after with our prizes. We still haven't heard if he was arrested to this day. We now are never going to think of Incredible Pizza as the fun, family-friendly place we once thought it was.
Country lanes in the UK are pretty narrow and have many blind bends. I was driving down a lane, and there was a cyclist in front of me, in the middle of the road, not wearing a helmet, and heading toward a completely blind bend. Suddenly, I realized that if a car swung around that bend, it would smash into the cyclist and pin him to my car. It was like a Final Destination vision. I couldn't hear or see another car, but I vividly saw this accident in my mind. I immediately slammed on my brakes, honked my horn, and pulled over. The poor cyclist guy panicked and stumbled to the hedges. Mere seconds later, some idiotic teenager came speeding out of the blind corner and missed us by inches. If we were still on the road, this guy would have plowed straight through the cyclist and into my car. I completely freaked out, and the cyclist came over to calm me down. I don't remember much, but I know I was saying, "You were dead," over and over again. I'm not a religious person at all, but that's the closest I've come to believing in some divine intervention. This is a ghost story from my family, but whatever. My dad isn't a strong believer in anything. He prays every morning for a few seconds before going to work, but that's about it. However, this is the only story he's ever told my brother that made him question his beliefs. It was a hot afternoon in Puebla, Mexico. My dad, along with his wife's mother, our grandma, had just arrived home. He had just returned from a work trip and was extremely tired in the Mexican heat. He didn't have the keys to the house gate. The gate was a green metal gate, like a giant sliding door that you couldn't see through. Climbing it was almost impossible. It went up high to 15 or 20 feet, and the 3 brick walls surrounding our property were the same height. We had a big property, but didn't live in a rural area, per se. Rather, it was a small dusty town with other big houses around. Next to the gate was a metal door, the same rusty green color. My dad went up to the door and began pounding on it. He knew that by this hour, my sister, who was in high school at the time, should have been home. Our house was large, with 3 floors, with thick brick walls, pushed all the way to the opposite side of the gate. So, my dad knocks and then yells, "Come open the gate." Then he hears from across our property, in the house, my sister yelling back,
"Wait, I'm coming."
So he waits and waits, and eventually, after a few minutes, he knocks again, now louder, and again he yells, now louder, "Open the damn gate." Again from inside the house, he hears the echoing yell of my sister saying,
"Wait, I'm coming."
And while waiting this time, my grandma looked over at him and said,
"What could be taking her so long?"
After waiting again, even longer this time, he decided to call my mom. She picked up, and he asked if she knew what was going on with my sister. My mom responded confused and in a bit of shock, then asked why. My dad responds by telling her the story, but she cuts him off midway and says,
"She's not home. She's with me right now."
As it turns out, my mom got off work early and picked up my sister from school. They went clothes shopping in a nearby outdoor mall. As he continued telling her the story, he began running around the property, checking all the walls for any sign of forced entry, a ladder, hook, rope, or anything to see if anyone had broken in. My mom then began driving home with my sister. At the front of the house, they all gathered. My mom opened the gates to get both cars in, and while doing so, my dad ran inside and went for his hidden gun. Then he tore the house in half. Nothing was stolen, no sign of breaking and entering, and no one was found. My dad was confused and believed someone was either on the property or had left without anything. But that's when my grandma told him something that would make him question the supernatural. She said, if it was a person, how did they sound just like your daughter? They both were there. They both heard the voice. And they both to this day swear up and down that it was my sister's voice, as clear as day. My dad always left the door open for something on the other side after that day. That house, my whole family swears, was haunted. It wasn't a creepy cabin in the woods or a 500-year-old abandoned house where a family was killed. It was just a piece of land that my mom and dad bought and built their house inside of, and it was haunted.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and this incident occurred when I was about 12 or 13. My family and I were on a summer vacation, and my brother and I had our own room while my dad and stepmom had theirs. My younger siblings were with my dad and stepmom. I remember it being around 2 mornings, going on 3. I was watching the Disney Channel when something unusual happened. A whole shadow walked past the TV, completely covering the screen. The strange part was that we were on the top floor, and our room didn't have a balcony. So, where did the shadow come from? I went straight under the covers and eventually fell asleep. I know going under the covers doesn't really help, but at the time, that's all I could think to do. I mentioned the incident to my little brother, and he shared that one night he was awake, and someone was peeking into the room while everyone else was asleep. Now, at the age of 19, and with my brother being 14, I've never told our parents because I thought they probably wouldn't believe me.
I was with my grandma, driving at night to a different city. She was listening to the radio, and I was watching TikTok when I saw something in the forest. I realized it was a woman. She stepped out of the woods and tried to break the car window. My grandma sped up the car. When he got to my cousin's house, I told them what happened. They thought we were just tired and seeing things. To this day, everybody thinks we're joking.
After watching the Perseid meteor shower, I was chased through the dark woods and down the mountainside in Silver Plume, Colorado, by 2 hoverbike-type floating crafts with riders who appeared to be wearing gray hazmat chemical suits. During the frantic pursuit down the twisted and winding trails, I failed to spot a sharp curve and ran straight off a steep cliff edge, clipping a pine tree on the way down, which probably saved my life, and landing on a rocky old tailing pile. Amazed that I'd survived the fall, I turned to watch as the speeder bikes whizzed past me overhead and disappeared. I cracked my tailbone but didn't dare move for hours, as within mere minutes more of these hovercrafts arrived in the vicinity, seemingly indifferent to my whereabouts. I observed as the entities dismounted and wandered around the forest, occasionally stopping, retrieving tools, digging in the ground, and taking samples of everything around. I watched them working like this, filling and securing small containers back on their speeders for the next 4 to 5 hours in stunned silence until the dawn broke and they finally decided to disappear and zoom away in the same manner they had appeared. It was the scariest night of my life. It's been over a year since then, but I think about this incident every single day and fear that I'll never know or have any reasonable explanation for what occurred that night. I don't even know if those pursuers were human, alien, military, or what. It really irks me to imagine what would have happened if they'd run me down. Turns out I wasn't the only one to see these things that night either. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? I had my buddy type something up for you. I'm just gonna copy/paste from the email. The above individual is my friend and confidant. He recounted the above tale to me the following day. To which I nodded and thought to myself was total BS. I had known this person for a few years at that point, living in the same small town, and had even gone on a few of his nocturnal excursions a few times. All-nighters until the sun came up. Very cool outings actually. His local knowledge of this strange slice of the Rockies is deep, usually peppered with personal anecdotes and weird horror stories of what went on here during the mining era. Many known tragedies have befallen Silver Plume and Georgetown over the 160 or so years that people have been digging here. Shootouts in the middle of the street, outlaws who had come into town, brothels lining the main street, miners getting trapped and dying, and the like. Silver Plume was a real deal Wild West, boom town during its heyday. Share of wild stories up until that point from this person. I figured he took something and tripped out up there on the mountain by himself. I didn't think much of it actually. Being chased by hoverbikes through the woods. Okay, man. As a trail runner and fellow explorer of this gorgeous landscape, I had been on the trail in question many times at night and had never felt unwelcome or creeped out in any way, save being surprised by a deer or some small critter. There are many abandoned mine sites and old shacks littered all over the mountains around here, rusted out old machinery and rock processing equipment, steel mining carts pitched over the edge of cliffs, mangled on the rocks below, mine tailings spewing their guts out into the open air, the debris and refuse of a mining industry that one day just up and left. People call this proud history. I call it a disgrace. An abandonment of responsible stewardship, but we're talking about the 1800s here, so I understand. And indeed there exist many Superfund sites around this area, if not the town itself, not sure. So, if there is any place one would hope to be scared, one need not look far. After recounting this outlandish story to me, he assured me he knew how crazy it sounded. He then proceeded to invite me that night to investigate further with him. Not one to turn down an adventure, I accepted. He suggested that instead of going back to where he was the night previous, we go to the other side of the valley up onto Republican Mountain, which is on the north side of town, and look south back across, over the town to Leavenworth Mountain and Pavilion Point, where he was supposedly chased, and see if we can see anything. I'll point out that the Perseid meteor shower is going on at this time. So at the very least, we will see some awesome shooting stars, so I was excited to go. I got some hiking stuff together, a headlamp, some water, and my binoculars. Not expecting to see anything extraordinary, except of course a great meteor show, I met my friend around midnight and we departed up the mountain. I will say right now that as soon as we started to ascend the mountain, the most unbelievable light show was happening in the sky and on the other side of the valley. To this day, I still can't believe that no one else saw what we saw. Understandably, you could not see it very well from town because of street lights and lights from houses, plus Silver Plume sits next to I-70 with lights lining the highway and cars driving by, but as soon as we started going up, walking parallel to town on the trail, it was unmistakable.
The trail that goes up Republican Mountain runs parallel to town for about 300 yards before switchbacking the other direction, so looking to your right, across town, across the valley, over the highway, all you see is Leavenworth Mountain and Pavilion Point further east. As we walked up, you could see that the lights of the highway made sort of a canopy of light over the road, a visible line, so that anyone at road level looking up would be blinded from seeing anything on the mountain above. I had never seen a meteor shower until that point, and it was incredible. However, I do not know if it was a play of light of some sort in the sky reflected onto the mountain, but the light show I was seeing was not happening in the sky, it was happening on the entire expanse of mountain stretching from Leavenworth all the way west, in the trees, above the trees, everywhere. A little twinkling as we walked up, but then it exploded and the entire mountain lit up in twinkling lights. I did not know what I was looking at. I had never seen anything like it. My friend described to me what he had seen the night before, and now I could see something was happening over on that side of the valley. I said, "What is this? Are you seeing what I am seeing right now?" I looked through my binocs and tried to focus on some of the light sources but could not make out any particular source. It was kind of like a diffuse light that comes from a lamp. You can't see the source, but there is light being emitted. It was kind of dull too. It was shining but not like a spotlight, almost like starlight, going into focus and back out again. This was the most unbelievable thing I had ever seen and wanted to know what was happening cosmically to cause such an effect. And why just on that mountainside? Why couldn't we see anything happening where we were sitting or further up on the mountain from us? Why just over there? We looked up and all around. We walked up further to see if it was happening where we were, but no. It was localized just on that side of the valley, nowhere else. Things started to get weird not long after. We had been up on the mountain, mesmerized by what we were witnessing for maybe an hour. We did not speak very much, only to gasp at some other flash that would happen. "Did you see that? What is this?" I started to get a creepy feeling right around then and thought, did I take something? Was I dehydrated? Did I not eat anything today, and that is the reason for what I'm seeing? It was right around this time, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours into our adventure, that the lights started to cluster into pods of 3, 4, and 5. They started to make a ring of lights that would move together across the mountain and what looked like thousands of them. These clusters were moving at inconceivable speeds, covering a half mile or 3/4 of a mile in an instant. I would watch one hover around randomly above the trees, around mid-mountain, and then shoot up to the ridge, and then back down to where it was, and then back up to the ridge, and then way over to the other side of the mountain. Almost like a ping-pong ball ricocheting around a glass jar. My friend said that he had seen these clusters of light the night previous, and I believed him now. What I saw next caused much distress for me in the following months and years. It caused the first panic attack I had ever had until that point. I did not know what a panic attack was. I thought it was just someone becoming nervous and agitated. I did not know that a panic attack is a crumbling of your world, a complete turning upside down of everything that you thought you had control over or played some part in. At this point in the night, at least 2 in the morning now, we have been watching an entire mountainside light up inexplicably. The clustering of orbs of light that seem now to be moving with some sort of intelligent agency. This would have been enough. But then I caught sight of what I can only describe as a conically shaped tower. This tower, wide at the base and tapering toward the top, was now present on the side of the mountain. It was also moving back and forth, from about mid-mountain, up to the ridge, back down to mid-mountain, and then across, then back to where it started, back to the ridge. I am scared now. Legitimately scared for my life. I have perpetual goosebumps all over my body. I have goosebumps now as I sit here writing this. Having been among the trees on that side of the mountain, I can say confidently they are at least 30 feet tall, maybe more, on average. This tower was at least 10 times as tall as the trees. A skyscraper moving up and down and across the mountain in the blink of an eye, right in front of me. I am thinking at this point, not, is this first contact, but how will society deal with this? Being visited by an alien intelligence? Will there be a world war soon? How will normal people make sense of this? How will governments react? Will the US or China strike first? I think I wondered a few of these questions out loud to my friend. I can't remember. It was so shocking. These craft appear to be defying physics and moving in ways I cannot accept our current technology is capable of performing. If humans had the power to create this type of technology, we would not be in an energy crisis. We would be colonizing the galaxy, I imagine. The only reason I believe I saw what I saw is because my friend was standing right next to me looking at the same thing, describing back to me what I was seeing. If I had been alone, I don't know if I would believe what I saw. I think I would think I had some sort of psychotic break. But we both saw the same thing because he described it to me as I was seeing it. I imagine I will expand on this event in further posts, trying to make sense of it, trying to remember as much as I can before it fades into uncertain memory. I will describe what I felt the next day when I had the first panic attack of my life and how that turned out for me. The most terrifying experience of my life. Until then. I was home alone one night, and I had been up doing the things one does at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night when your ADD is absolutely everywhere. Playing Call of Duty, writing, listening to music, and texting everyone as if they don't sleep either. I like keeping the lights off because I find comfort in the darkness. I open my bedroom door and peer into the darkness as my eyes adjust from staring at a bright screen to looking into the dark because I hear talking. I live in an apartment building, and voices in the breezeway are quite common. However, this is not the hour for whispering outside people's doors. Then, I notice a tall, dark figure walking from my kitchen to the living room. I catch a glint of light from my TV reflecting off its eyes. So what do I do but decide to approach it? I'm not sure what I planned on doing when I got face to face with it. I walk down the hall, and it disappears around the corner. I round the corner and find the living room empty. I never was one for believing in paranormal things, despite the many encounters with what I've been told were spirits and demons, etc. The next morning, I texted my girlfriend at the time, and she was thrilled to tell me about superstitions and supernatural things. Apparently, many of the things I do are supposedly invitations for spirits into my home. I've done these things for years and have had encounters for years. However, I've always just assumed it's because I don't sleep, which is why I'm not afraid of following demons in my house. She said that staring at myself in the mirror and whistling at home by myself, which I often do, will invite them in. So she could be right. Or I might be dealing with schizophrenia, like the rest of my family. I'm a 12-year-old female who can see things that others cannot. I am the strangest child in my family, but my parents leave it be. I've always wondered about the boy from this door who has been watching me. I moved from Colorado to Slippery Rock last year in June-July. My room is connected to my sister's room and above my parents' room. There's always been this creepy attic door on the roof of my closet. I always leave one side of the closet door open so it doesn't break when I open the closet. My parents bought this house and never saw the door in the house photos when they bought it. The owners never mentioned it either. The creepy part is that they said they only had one attic door, and that door is in my sister's room. I've always had the question, should I check it out or leave it so I don't upset the boy who watches me from that creepy attic door while I sleep? The creepy part about the boy is that he seems alive but is dead. This is real, and most people never believe me.
It all started before my grandma passed away last year. After her death, it got worse and worse until this day. My mother called me last year in the evening. At that time, I was on the bus on the way home. Anyway, she was crying, asking where I was because my grandma was dying. I told her to go to the hospital without me because it still takes until I'm home. So I went home and was about 7:30 in the evening at home and alone. Until then, everything was still normal. I locked the front door, took a shower, made myself something to eat, and finally went to my room and turned on the TV. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, I heard our front door open and the voices of my parents. You must know my room is upstairs. So I went down the stairs a few steps and looked across the grounds to the front door. I called my parents but got no answer. I went all the way down and stood there in the hallway. I looked over to the living room. No light. Nothing. I went to open the front door only to find it was still locked, just as I left it. From then on, I felt a bit queasy in my stomach and wrote to my mother asking when she would be coming home again. Her answer was only that it could still be hours. I was worried, went to the kitchen, took the biggest knife we had, and went through every room in the whole house. Nothing. So I called a friend of mine and told her about it while I went back up to my room. She just said that I probably imagined it and it has happened to her many times. So I lay down in my bed and was on my cell phone. Not even an hour later, I heard a kitchen cabinet slam shut. I felt my heart start to race, and I became shaky. I just sat there on my bed, still with the knife in my hand, staring at my closed bedroom door. But it did not stop. I heard footsteps, strong, slow footsteps going up the stairs. After that, nothing again. Silence. I reached for my cell phone to write to my mother that they should please hurry because something was going on in the house. I heard someone arriving in the hallway right in front of my room door. I heard the creaking of the floor. It stopped right in front of my door. And now comes what I will never forget. I heard a loud male clearing his throat. I felt myself start to cry. I was so damn scared for my life. I went to my door to look through the keyhole, but I saw nothing. I pulled the door open, ready to fight back, but there was nothing. From that point, I grabbed my cell phone and a front door key and ran as fast as I could out of the house, as far as I could, until I arrived at a bank that was completely lit up. I called my best friend and stayed sitting there until my parents arrived home. The next day I told them everything that happened. My mother said that maybe it was my grandmother who looked after me at home while she was soon clinically dead in the hospital and saw that I was not present there. But to this day, I doubt it. This throat clearing was 100% male and not from my grandma. From then on, such incidents happened more often in our house. My father gets it most often. Most of the time, when he takes me and my sister to the train station and my mother is already at work early in the morning, he hears the cabinet slamming shut in our kitchen or in the living room as if something were toppling over. There was also an incident when I was riding my scooter to a friend's house. I came home in the evening, put the scooter in the basement, and went upstairs to the house. My mom asked me when I left the house. Sis looked a little scared and confused. I said I had left around mid-morning. My dad came over, looked at me, and just said,
Michelle, your mother cut my hair in the upstairs bathroom after you left. Your sister was also upstairs. We thought you had just come home 2 hours ago. The basement door opened and slammed shut again.
I shook my head, having arrived home just 5 minutes ago. To this day, things like this still happen often, and I really hope it doesn't get worse. The last time something like this happened was just a week ago. And this time it was in my room, while I was not at home.
When I was 10 years old, my great-grandfather passed away. While he was alive, he detested us kids playing on his bed. He had one good eye, and even that wasn't particularly strong. When he died, the family returned to the house he had lived in. I recall mentioning to my mother that I was feeling sleepy. My aunt suggested I lie down in Papa's old bed and take a nap. His bed was exactly as he had left it, with neatly tucked-in blankets and two fluffy, inviting pillows. Eagerly, I jumped into the bed, unwittingly undoing all his meticulous work. I was there for just a moment before the bed began shaking vigorously. Startled, I looked up, and there stood Papa.
Boy, didn't I tell you to stop lying in my bed?
I don't recall if my feet touched the floor, but suddenly, I found myself screaming and running down the hallway with Papa close behind. And that's a true story. Even in my 50s, I remember it as if it happened just yesterday. I'm not sure what category this would fall under, but it was definitely the strangest experience I've had in years. I worked the night shift at a warehouse. I won't specify which one, as it's not crucial to the story. On this particular night, I was heading home around 3 a.m. My house is located in the hills, about half a mile from the main road. As I made my way up the road, which transitions from a nice, smooth surface to dirt halfway, I immediately felt eyes watching me. Usually, I wouldn't be bothered, as it's common to spot wildlife observing me during my journey up the road. However, as I reached my usual parking spot, I retrieved the pocket knife I keep in the glove box and stepped out of my vehicle. My attention was drawn to a dark patch of woods on the other side of the road. Something inside me urged me to look in that direction, and I calmly raised my knife, saying, "I know you're there." As soon as those words left my lips, the world went eerily quiet. This was particularly strange, considering there was a waterfall about 500 to 600 feet away from me, and I could always hear it when coming home. Even the waterfall fell silent. This bizarre quietness persisted for about 10 seconds before the sounds returned, and I heard something running away from me. Keeping my knife by my side, I walked to the house, opting not to run, as it felt like a bad idea. Upon entering, I noticed that the dogs that usually greeted me were nowhere in sight. They were both in the living room, gazing out the window in the same direction from which I had felt the unseen presence. I didn't mention anything to my fiancée, as she was asleep and didn't share my belief in the paranormal. My belief stems from my Mapuche heritage, South American Indian tribe, and I grew up hearing stories from my dad about Native American legends, including Wendigos, skinwalkers, and other spirit creatures. Since that night, I've never felt that same presence. I have no idea what it could have been, but I'm certain it wasn't deer, which I typically encounter around my home. I used to live in an old house from about age 7 to 10, so this happened a while ago. When my family, mom and twin sisters, both 4 at the time, moved in, there was something kind of off about it. There was always this sense of dread, the type that makes you feel like you're being watched. However, the creepiest part of the house was this small closet underneath our stairs, going down to the basement, where my sisters and I slept. In the 4 years of living there, none of us ever went into it because of how creepy it was, but that's beside the point. The first couple of incidents that happened weren't really that big, just things like lights turning on when you thought you turned them off, and doors doing the same thing. But then, the more messed up stuff started happening. Most nights when I tried to sleep, I always had this sense that someone was watching me in the pitch black, and some nights I couldn't even move. One night, when I was about 8, I couldn't sleep at all. I tried to sleep in my mom's bed. I lay awake until about 2 in the morning until I started to get the feeling someone was watching me, and I couldn't move. That was until I heard my mom's music box start playing, then I was totally scared. When I tried to wake my mom up, it stopped. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Nothing really happened after that, except that my sisters slowly stopped sleeping in our room and started sleeping on the upstairs couch because we were so scared. Eventually, my mom had to sell the house. We couldn't afford it anymore. On the last night that we were there, one of my sisters and I decided that we were going to go into the closet and look behind the corner just to see what was there. Right as we were going around it, the door slammed shut. We screamed, ran to the door, pushing each other out of the way. When we went to tell our family, they didn't believe us. Years later, I learned that the old man who built the house and lived in it also died in it, too. LOL. For years in the area where I live, there have been sightings of a monkey-like creature that is 4 feet tall and probably 300 pounds. People have described it as being anatomically built like a gorilla but having ears like a bat or cat. They have also said that it has been managed. The first sighting was in 1983 at a diner in town. It was 8 p.m., and the manager was closing up the restaurant. He heard banging at the front window and went to see what was going on. Then he called the police. When the police arrived, they fired a gun to scare it off. The creature then ran into the woods and wasn't seen again until 1991, in which the most known incident occurred on December 16, 1991. Police were called around 7:30 a.m.
I got a call from a frightened woman early morning on Monday. She told me there was some kind of monkey out here attacking people, so I went out to see. When I got there, I saw a mangled mess of a body lying in the road. She was locked in her car safely. The body was of a 17-year-old boy who had been torn apart. His upper lip and nose were gone from his face. Both hands and both feet were gone from his limbs as well.
Recounted Sheriff Mike Doyle of Oakland. This was my most recent terrifying nightmare. I've had many, but this one was really different from the rest. So, for some backstory, when I was a little kid, I lived in Miami. From the stories I've heard, the neighborhood I lived in was considered the hood. When I was about 5 years old, we left. Now, into the dream, or should I say nightmare. My parents decided that we were going to visit our old house in that Miami neighborhood. When we got there, we noticed it was blocked from the rest of the city, with a tall metal gate surrounding the entire neighborhood. The gate didn't have an opening, instead, it led to a small hallway. For some reason, a kid from my current school was now there, waiting at the gate with me and my family. So, we got inside the neighborhood, and it was run down and broken. Fast forward a few hours into the dream, my family and friends found my childhood house and decided to check it out. My brother went into his room, my parents in theirs, and my friend, my sister, and I were chilling in the living room. We were standing there for a few minutes when my little sister said something silly to my friend, something a 5-year-old would say. I can't really remember. He got angry and turned to me, saying he was going to hit her. He then proceeded to go into another room to get a golf club. I tried calming him down and calling my parents, but no one listened. To protect my sister, I took like 3 hits with the club. After a few more hits, he picked up my sister and bit her on the neck. I tackled him to the ground, still with my sister in his jaws. Blood everywhere. I tried to punch him, but it didn't do anything, but I kept trying. A few more seconds, and I started jabbing a stick into his rib cage, but nothing was working. The cops came and took him away. The look in his eyes was unforgettable. I've never seen so much hate in someone's eyes. We stayed in that house for years. One day, I was watching the news on the TV that just appeared in the house. It said that my friend went crazy in prison, staying in his cell for days, never touching light, and that he carved a smile into his face. At the end of the broadcast, it said that he went missing from his cell a few days ago. I broke down because I knew he was coming for me. I grabbed a knife and tried to kill myself. Before I got the chance, I looked behind me. And there he was. Bleached white skin, wearing all black, and with a bloody smile on his face. He aggressively yelled, "Suicide!" and slit my throat. That was one of the most vivid nightmares I've ever had. It was trippy seeing that same friend at school the next day. The closest thing I could find to the look in his eyes in that nightmare was a picture of Jeff the killer. But you probably won't find it. My name is Max, and I'm currently 15. The story I'm about to share happened to me when I was around 11 or 12, although I can't recall the exact age. My friends and I share a passion for exploration, seizing every opportunity to embark on adventures. The key characters in my story are Max, me, Bren, a close friend, Nick, a best friend who always explored with me. This particular incident didn't take place at my house. I was at my best friend Nick's house. We were thrilled about exploring a creek near his place, a location we had visited multiple times, always uncovering something new. This marked the third time something eerie occurred at the creek, following encounters with a man chasing us through a tunnel and a cult that claimed ownership of the creek. If you're interested, I can share those stories later, they're brief. Nick and I had explored the area with a few other friends, but only one, Bren, could join us for this trip. Bren, the oldest in our group at about 14, was like the unofficial leader, even though none of us really listened to him. Attempts to recruit more friends were unsuccessful due to the unsettling experiences at the creek that deterred them. Equipped with snacks and pocket knives, we prepared for the adventure ahead. The walk, approximately a quarter of a mile, posed no challenge to our energetic minds. The path led through a stretch of woods, and after about an hour, we arrived at the entrance of the creek. As a national park, there were no trespassing concerns, not that it would have stopped us. We descended a staircase, our playful antics causing a few laughs. After reaching the creek, we splashed around for about 20 minutes, enjoying every moment. As the sun set, we reluctantly decided to leave, mindful of Nick's mom's curfew. We headed back up the stairs, about 100 steps, and reached the trail leading to the street. Near the end of our journey, I noticed a woman about 200 yards away, holding a knife and wearing a nightgown. Alarmed, I informed my friends, but when we turned back, she had disappeared. The group believed me, and we ran home, with a mysterious white van intermittently following us, its headlights vanishing when we turned around. The unnerving pursuit continued, leading us to take back roads in an attempt to escape the mysterious vehicle. After everyone reached home, we discussed the day's events. Later that night, Bren arrived at our front door, recounting a disturbing experience of something knocking and scratching at his window, attempting to get in. Though no visible markings were found, Bren's genuine fear left us unsettled. Hours later, as Nick and I spoke with Bren about the previous night, they revealed witnessing a girl resembling the one I had described being hit by a white van. The scene vanished before their eyes. Intrigued and unnerved, we continued our search for the girl, seeking answers to our lingering questions.
A few years ago, I was a trainee in a local supermarket. While this may not be the most crucial point, I believe a bit of background information is never amiss. Well, it so happened that I had an early shift and needed to be at work by 6 a.m. It was late November, so it was dark when I hopped on my bike and set off. Up until then, everything was pretty normal. At least, until I took a turn to the right. That was when I heard a scream. The peculiar thing is that it kind of sounded human, but also not. it wasn't a cat in a fight. I've lived my entire life with cats, and I know how they sound when they scream. Yet, it wasn't entirely human either. A shiver went down my spine, I remember it vividly. I pedaled faster, eager to leave that place and reach somewhere safe. The next parts of my journey were relatively calm. And then there was the bridge. To reach the street where the shop I worked in is located, I had to take a route under a sturdy bridge. It's nothing out of the ordinary, and I didn't mind. However, after I passed the bridge, I heard the same scream again, this time directly behind me. It felt like ice was flowing through my veins, and I quickly rode away. Glancing behind me to ensure nothing was following, I saw a strange shadow, vaguely resembling a human, but not entirely. It's hard to describe. I heard the scream 3 more times before I changed my route. Since then, the screams stopped. I never heard them again. But it still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it or when I drive to work. The route is almost the same, except for a few parts. True story, I was around 5 to 6 at this time, and we were moving to a different province. We didn't have a place yet, so we were staying at a nearby shelter while looking for one. I forget where the shelter was, but we were told it had been transformed into a shelter after someone decided to make use of the abandoned building. We were told it was half of an institution or something years and years before I was even born. Anyway, we had a strange room. I'd say it was about an 8 by 9 foot room, with a heavy metal door and 2 bunk beds, one on either side of the room. The bunk beds had metal framing and seemed a tad bit unstable, and the mattresses were hard. The floor was concrete, and there wasn't even a tiny window. But we didn't complain because it was temporary. We were the only ones living in a room on that floor. I remember vividly that my siblings and mother were in the kitchen preparing the food for the shelter. As it was their turn, that was part of the agreement to stay there. Plus, there were at least 40 other people, spanning 2 to 3 floors and a basement. I remember going to bed early because I was really tired. So, my mom opened the heavy door and let me in the room, turned on the light, and waited for me to climb the ladder to the top of the bed before saying, "Good night." She then turned the light off, and I snuggled in the blankets. But I couldn't fall asleep, so I stared at the ceiling. I don't know how much time had passed, but then I heard the bunk bed on the other side of the room creak, as if someone was climbing up the ladder on that bunk bed, right across from mine. Since my older brother was the one who slept there, I spoke, thinking it was him, and he somehow quietly snuck into the room to not wake me up. So when I heard the creaking stop, indicating someone was on the mattress across from me, I said, "Hey, Aiden, you didn't have to sneak in, I can't fall asleep," only to get no response. This was unusual for him since he'd usually say something right away, either to tease me or help me sleep. However, I got no response, just the sound of the sheets rustling a tiny bit. I assumed he didn't hear me, so I spoke louder. "Hi Aiden, did you guys finish the food yet?" No response. To this, I became a little bit worried that something had him upset, so I sat up and turned my head towards the bed, hoping that I would be able to comfort him if he was upset. I barely got his name out of my mouth when I realized it wasn't him, but a dark figure, some girl around my age at the time, with 2 braids and a puffy old-fashioned dress. She had been sitting crisscross, staring and pointing in my direction. I, of course, got so scared I couldn't scream, thinking if I did, I'd be harmed in some way. So, I stayed quiet and hid under my blankets. A few hours later, my mom came in and turned on the light with my siblings behind her. I saw the light on, so I automatically assumed someone was in the room, and I was safe. I shot up out from under my blankets and quickly climbed down the ladder and hugged my mom. She asked me what was wrong since I was still shaking. But, thinking that the girl was still in the room, I waited until the next day when we went for our morning walk to explain to her what had happened. After explaining what happened, how I couldn't sleep, and heard someone go on the bunk bed across from me thinking it was my older brother, and then seeing the girl with braids and a puffy dress, that was just a pitch-black figure, my mom was horrified. But just to be sure it wasn't my imagination, she went asking people in the shelter about a supposed ghost, giving no details about what I had told her. This lady, we'll call her Courtney, told my mom.
Yes, there is a spirit roaming. It takes the form of a girl and has 2 braids and an old-fashioned dress. She used to visit me every night but suddenly stopped when you guys moved in.
We were the only children in the shelter, so that might have been the reason? I don't know. My mom replied to Courtney.
Well, my daughter saw someone with the exact description you had given me. And at first, I thought it was just her imagination, or something like that.
Anyway, Courtney then walked away. Things were pretty quiet after that. I had seen something run in the corner of my eye every once in a while, or heard the sound of knives sharpening when no one was in the kitchen, and the occasional sounds of screaming from the basement when no one was down there. However, it was a family room you could book. One day, our family had booked it, and there were kids' toys, colored maps, wooden tiled floors, and a TV. We were watching Land Before Time, and I looked at the dark side of the room in curiosity. And there she was, standing in the middle of the dark side of the basement. She ran around the corner. The basement was in an L shape, and we were using half of the L side of it. Anyway, at this point, I was more curious about her than afraid. I kind of thought she wanted to play since she was in the toy section of the room. So, I followed her, thinking it was a game of hide and seek. I stood up from the couch without a word, and my mom asked me where I was going, but I didn't answer and just walked into the dark side of the room, which to her was strange since I had a fear of the dark back then, as most kids do. She was confused why I would go into the darkest side of the basement, where light didn't reach willingly. She followed me, and I entered a dark closet. I started looking around frantically and kept asking, "Where are you? Don't you want to play with me? Is that why you keep running around me?" I asked over and over, questions along those lines. My mom obviously was concerned, turned on the lights, picked me up, turned off the TV, and brought me and my siblings upstairs. She asked why I was acting the way I was, and according to her, I said, "She wants to play." After that, my family started getting scratches and tiny bruises mysteriously. Within a week, my mom found a place, and we moved there, leaving our toys and stuff behind, believing the spirit could have possessed them to follow us. We only kept a few clothes, money, food, and IDs. We bought new stuff at the store and lived on the other side of town from the shelter.
When I was a kid, between the ages of 4 and 9, a ton of paranormal things happened to me. This is just one of them. I was in first grade, coming home from school, excited about the candy cane party my teacher was going to throw tomorrow, where we all had to wear red and white. When I got home, I felt overwhelmingly tired. I had this strangely vivid dream where I arrived at school late and my teacher informed me that we had new seats. When I reached my seat, I asked the kid next to me why he was only wearing red. He then said, "I'm wearing red and white," pointing at his red shirt and then pointing at his face because he was white. The following morning, my dad woke up late, so I got to school late. My teacher informed me that we had new seats. When I got to my seat, I asked the kid next to me why he was only wearing red. He then said, "I'm wearing red and white," and pointed at his red shirt, then pointed at his face. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my sisters and I used to share a room. Most nights, my older sister and I would see two distinct figures. She would see a lady in white standing in the doorway, directly in front of my bed. I would see a man with red eyes, or at least I thought it was a man, as all I could see were red eyes. Though my sister could see the lady, she said she never spoke to her. She just stood there, getting closer every night. On the other hand, I would see a pair of bright red eyes staring at me from the closet. A disembodied masculine voice would whisper,
JJ, come to the closet and play.
Over and over. Sometimes, my old sister and I would jump into each other's beds and hide under the blankets until morning. This went on for months until my dad decided to get the house blessed again. We never saw them after that. I'm 24 now, and my wife and I recently had a baby. I've been having weird dreams recently. They always start with me standing in my son's room, staring at the closet, and the familiar set of red eyes would stare back at me. In my most recent dream, he actually spoke. His voice a lot deeper and booming than I remember.
You didn't come to play with me, but your son may be the one to play.
He said before I woke up. I called my dad and told him about the whole thing. He told me he remembers me telling him about that man years before. But then, just then, he went silent for about 5 minutes. When he spoke again, he recounted seeing the same figure as a child. He also told me he remembered having the same dream after I was born. I've blessed my house twice already, but I can only protect my son so much. I just hope, I really, really hope that he doesn't go play in the closet. I may never see him again.
Do you know that feeling when you believe you've witnessed something, but others don't see it, and you struggle to convince them it was real? Typically, it's one or two of your overly paranormal believing friends against the skepticism of your logical friends. I was born and raised in the Middle East, where people don't usually talk about ghosts, but instead, we believe in jinns or demons, not in a paranormal context, but within the framework of religious beliefs. Growing up, my parents taught me cultural practices, like invoking the name of God when afraid, to alleviate fear during moments of darkness. Belief in ghosts was taboo due to religious reasons, so paranormal ideas were neither encouraged nor embraced. The setting of this event is in the Middle East. I, 19, female, and a group of 12 friends from high school decided on a road trip and camping adventure, but hadn't fully decided on the location. Driving between states would only take a few hours. For those in other countries, a drive between our states usually takes between 1 and 4 hours. We opted for 2 cars. One, a 2000 Nissan Patrol Safari, capable of accommodating 8 people, and the other for food and camping equipment. My parents dropped me and 4 friends at a patrol station where the whole group was meeting up. We grabbed some snacks, gas, and ice for our coolers before setting off. During our drive, we didn't have a clear camping plan. Our location was very safe, mostly mountains and desert, eliminating the concern of creepy woods. We often randomly drove until we found a suitable camping spot. We weren't avid planners, and half the time, we didn't know the exact area we were in, but the roads were straightforward. We drove for about 2 hours until we reached a place called Almasai, where we stopped for lunch. Then, we drove another hour until we reached Juma Bazaar, or the Friday markets. It's worth mentioning a peculiar encounter at the bazaar. While talking to a local vendor about his assortment of fruits, he offered a bag of lychees about to expire at a discounted price. When I questioned the practicality of buying so many fruits, he responded,
"It's okay if I don't sell them. I'll just drive them down that road,"
pointing to a path worn by cars. "And when I drive back, they'll be fresh again." I laugh, assuming a language barrier or a misunderstanding. Keep this in mind for later. By this point, it was 3 p.m., and we decided to head to a spot recommended by a friend, 20 meters, who had been there with his family. Using Google Maps, we drove through a village. People were friendly, waving as we passed. One man even stopped in front of our car with a tray of fresh pomegranates, inviting us to eat. Although tempted, we continued, suspecting a ploy to sell us fruits and handmade items. Describing the village, the houses were made of large stone bricks, held together with hay and mud. Chickens, goats, a donkey, and the children were present. Despite the hospitality, there was an unexplainable desire to stay. We reached our campsite at 7 p.m., set up quickly, and enjoyed the fire. The area was not scary, just a vast desert. We weren't alone. Another family camped nearby. We spent the evening by the fire, talking and eating, and eventually went to bed around 2 a.m. At 4:10 a.m., I woke to an eerie silence. The family from the neighboring camp was awake and conversing in a language that sounded like German. About 20 minutes later, they left. At 5 a.m., we noticed a woman in traditional clothing atop a nearby mountain, staring at us. She didn't respond to a wave, just stood there. Later, she appeared to sit and partially hide. The day continued normally, but when we left at 8 p.m., we drove towards the mountain to explore the woman's origin. No village was found. Returning to the earlier village, it appeared abandoned and wrecked, unlike our daytime experience. Confused, we accelerated, reaching our city, but everything looked aged and ruined as if abandoned for years. The other car was equally horrified. We reached the end of the village, and my friend, looking back, saw the same woman running after us, creating an unnerving sense of fear. I didn't speak of this incident for a while. I moved out of the country a few months later, and even now, I occasionally research the village, watching videos and reading articles. The village was abandoned in 1968. We visited in 2019, and during the day, there were people. But at night, the village seemed deserted. Remember the local fruit seller's story about driving through an area to make lychees fresh? The strangest part was when we unloaded the cooler. The ice hadn't melted. It was in perfect cubes, as if it had never melted. None of us understand what happened that night. Most of us no longer communicate. But when we do, this trip is never mentioned.
In my 40 years on Earth, I have seen some crazy stuff. For example, I once helped a paranoid and delusional neighbor get treatment for a drug addiction and get locked out of my apartment. Then later on, I incubated a bacterial disease that caused my skin to break out into red oozing sores. But this was much creepier. It all began on my drive home from work on a quiet summer afternoon after replacing a payment terminal at a gas station. Outside my van, the sky was clear blue and hot when my van climbed the last half mile of Mesava Avenue in Duluth. Then it all fell apart when I turned left onto 4th Street to come upon a hysterical middle-aged Hispanic woman screaming that her daughter had been stabbed. Then on cue, the daughter stumbled out of the home. The lady must have been in her early 20s and dressed in jet black clothes. Before I could respond, the hysterical mother opened the sliding doors of my van and laid the daughter down on my equipment in the back. Now there was no turning back, so I turned back. I reversed the track as fast as I could on the narrow street while my new passenger screamed in the back,
"Drive faster! I'm bleeding back here!"
in a repetitive chorus. But when I reached Mesaba Avenue, I knew that this trip would be no reenactment of the Fast and the Furious. Complete gridlock awaited me. I could feel my blood pressure explode like that of a nuclear reactor in a meltdown. Is this what it's like to be an ambulance driver?
"I'm dying back here!"
I gunned that engine and raced through the last intersection, bringing the hospital into sight. Punching the horn, I pulled into the ramp that I believed was the ER, but a locked door impeded my entry. I pressed the call button and screamed that this stabbed woman needed urgent help. The voice on the other side said that I'd have to enter the ER on the other side. I continued to plead, but in the end, only screamed at the wall. I gave up and returned to the van to find the lass lying awkwardly on my equipment.
"They won't let us in."
I lifted her over my shoulder for the last block to the ER, but instead, she fell like a sack of sand. At that moment, I felt a terrible wave of sorrow. Had I failed this woman? Is she about to die here on the hot pavement? I can let that happen. I ran down to an ambulance parked at the end of the street, where the EMTs were relaxing.
"This woman needs help!"
The EMTs got into action like trained soldiers and got to work applying pressure to the wound. The damsel had been stabbed above her right breast, and the blood had turned her black shirt shiny like it sparkled in the sun. They cut off her blood-soaked shirt and applied bandages while she lay out on the hot pavement. Then they brought in a stretcher and rolled her away. My exhaustion hit me like a ton of brick. But I got no rest. My actions had made me, in a fashion, a celebrity of crime. 2 young officers arrived in pristine uniforms. They photographed me with their smartphones, and for the first time, I realized that the damsel had smudged blood onto my shirt. I explained to them how I ended up here. Then another officer arrived, and the process was repeated. They must have considered me a suspect in the slashing of the young lady, because the officers wanted to seize my auto and uniform for evidence. When the officers were satisfied with their photographs, they escorted me into the hospital to change clothes. I looked like a gothic clown afterward in the ridiculously tight black pants and vest. The afternoon was fading when I finally left the hospital to chill in the cooling atmosphere while the officers investigated. I'd become so popular that the local detective wanted a word. In the meantime, I was entertained by a parade of patients rolling to the ambulance entrance, and another officer arrived to supervise me. All that I could do was chill out until it was all over. An hour later, the detective arrived in a van marked crime scene investigation. He was a balding middle-aged man who couldn't hide his exhaustion. The man was more cheery than the officers, and he complimented me on my van, still splattered in blood like that of a mischievous child. He had a real camera for the first time and took great care in photographing me again, on the inside of my van. Then, like a celebrity on a press stint, I explained my recent activity before finally getting left free to drive home to find 4th Street closed by 2 cop cars. To the man who stabbed that woman that afternoon, justice is waiting for you. You won't escape what you did to her. P.S. The last 2 photos are the actual photo of the van. In my old house, a ton of weird stuff happened. One time, I pretended to be sick so I could stay home from school. And my mom and I were the only ones in the house. My mother worked from home on a computer and had to talk to people struggling with quitting smoking. Her room was kind of close to mine. So, I woke up at about 9 o'clock in the morning to a feeling that I was being watched. Initially, I thought it was my mom checking on me, but a few seconds later, I heard her talking in her room.
My name is Carol.
I ripped the covers off my head, but to my surprise, there was no one there. I was certain that someone else was in my room. As you might know from reading my ghost story, I don't usually interfere with the paranormal. However, I felt brave this time, so I just sat up in my bed until I felt like I wasn't being watched anymore. As soon as I got up off my bed, I heard breathing. At first, I thought it was just the sound the bed made from me getting up or my foot brushing the floor. But the sound persisted, and then I realized that there was no mistaking that sound. It was someone breathing. I felt calm when the thought occurred to me that it might just be my mom in the other room breathing loudly. However, I soon heard her talking again to her client on her work computer.
My name is Carol.
But the breathing overlapped her talking, and it sounded very close. I spent the next 5 minutes looking around the room. Then I just sat down on my bed, and it got louder. The sound was coming from under my bed. I slowly lifted up the mattress, and I heard the breathing slow down as if it was trying to be quieter. But there was no one there. Nothing. Nothing was there. Yet when I moved closer, I could still hear it louder than ever. There were no vents or anything that could be making that sound under my bed.
I decided to just ignore it and go downstairs to watch Scooby-Doo. I never told anyone. Not sure why, but I didn't, and I never heard it again.
To provide a bit of background on this true story, I am European. I shared another story a couple of months ago about an incident in Tuscany, Italy. In this tale, my friends, let's call them Lisa, Anna, and Charlotte, and I are from Spain. This occurred at the end of September 2023, when we were still fairly new to the USA. Having moved here for law school, along with my friends, we decided to explore the nature of this beautiful continent, living in NYC. The adventure included a road trip to Canada, driving around Lake Ontario, and then returning to NYC through upstate NY. Everything went smoothly until the last night. For our final night, we rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate NY. To give locals an idea, we were about half an hour's drive from Harrisburg, I think. Lisa and I chose to spend the night in this cabin to be close to nature. The cabin was old, made from log wood, and lacked running water or electricity. Despite our friends being city girls, we all embarked on this adventure. I, a lifelong Boy Scout and former Scout leader, and Lisa, experienced in survival in the wild in Europe, felt confident. As we drove towards the cabin, it was already past 10 p.m., and the night was exceptionally dark. We lost internet connection with the GPS, forcing me to rely on intuition and a map. On the way, Anna and Charlotte, in the back of the car, grew uneasy after losing phone service. In the pitch-black forest, we saw a well-organized campfire, though no houses or people were in sight. This, combined with the late hour, unnerved us. Realizing we had taken the wrong trail earlier, we turned around and finally arrived at the cabin after some detours. When we arrived, it was still raining, and Anna and Lisa were hesitant to leave the car due to the darkness. Lisa and I used our phone flashlights to explore the cabin, finding old flashlights and attempting to light the fireplace. Despite the rain-soaked wood, we managed to create a small fire in the stove. With flashlights and a makeshift fire, all four of us settled into the cabin. While making pasta, Anna approached me, revealing she had seen an old cemetery and a figure walking around it. Brushing it off initially, I assured her I would secure the doors before sleeping. After dinner, the girls retired early, and I, enjoying the outdoors, sat on the front porch with a beer and a flashlight. As I gazed into the darkness, I heard a strange roar, resembling a deep bear growl. Startled, I scanned the area and spotted a tall figure with brown fur or skin, blending with the autumn trees. The creature, bipedal with long arms, locked eyes with me before disappearing behind the tree with another roar. I went inside, feeling scared, locked all doors, and tried to dismiss it as exhaustion. Despite my initial fear, the rest of the night was uneventful. The next morning, the weather had cleared, and the forest seemed calm. We had breakfast and headed back to the bustling city. I never discussed what I saw that night. But now, months later, I share it here. If anyone has rational reasoning or ideas about what it could have been, feel free to enlighten me. I apologize in advance for any possible grammar or spelling errors. English is my fourth language, and I'm still working towards perfection.